Hello everyone, my name is Krystale Joy Lanzaderas. Right now, we are going to discuss about the land-water interfaces, particularly in the larger plants. When we say land-water, it means fresh water flowing over the land, while the interfaces describe a surface that forms a common boundary between two bodies. Hence, the land-water interfaces focus on the littoral zone and wetlands, where they can be found on the larger plants. Of course, the aquatic macrophytes. Now we have our learning objectives. At the end of this discussion, the learners will be able to 1. Discuss the aquatic macrophytes of the littoral zone and wetlands. 2. Provide an example of each type of aquatic macrophyte and its characteristics. 3. Elucidate the 4 categories of aquatic plant removal. And lastly, give the importance of aquatic macrophytes in freshwater ecosystem.
Aquatic macrophytes of the littoral zone and wetlands.
What is the meaning of aquatic macrophytes? Any macroscopic forms of aquatic vegetation that grow in or near the water are known as aquatic macrophytes, meaning to say that macrophytes are plants that can be seen with the naked eye. These plants are ecologically characterized by the presence of water, which means that can be fresh brackish, saline, or eutrophic and grows at least a part of their life cycle in water, either completely submerged or immersed. They include a vast group of macroscopic organisms that ranging from vascular plants, such as ferns, bryophytes, spermatophytes, and macroalgae flourishing either permanently or periodically in the wet ecosystem. Now we have the littoral zone. Can be defined by the presence of sunlight at the sediment level and the corresponding growth of partially submerged to fully submerged aquatic plants. In freshwater environments such as lakes or rivers, littoral zones includes wetlands, or the areas of land seasonally or permanently inundated by the body of water. It is also generally characterized by the abundance of dissolved oxygen, nutrients, water motion, and alternating intervals of submergence and exposure. As you can see this illustration above, the littoral region is an interface zone between the land of the drainage basin and the open water of lakes and some streams. And also, as you can see this image below, represents that the size of the littoral zone in relation to the size of the pelagic region varies greatly among lakes and depends on the geomorphology of the basin and the rates of sedimentation that have occurred since the inception of the lake. Now we have the wetlands. That means an area of land characterized by soil either covered in or saturated with water. While wetlands can be permanently or temporarily flooded, as well as the depth and length of the flooding varies depending on the type of wetlands. However, even during the unflooded periods, the soil remains saturated. The water saturation in these ecosystems determines soil development and influences biological, physical, and chemical attributes. The water in wetland also creates the ideal conditions that foster the growth of hadroprites, which are plants that are adapted to grow in saturated soils, which is often groundwater but can also come from a nearby lake or river. Seawater can also produce wetlands in coastal regions that encounter strong tides. As you can see this picture on the right side, some wetlands are transitional zones between upland and aquatic ecosystem, meaning they are neither completely dry nor wholly submerged, although others are scattered across the landscape in upland depressions that collect water or in zones where groundwater comes to the surface. Aquatic macrophytes of the littoral zone. There are four types of aquatic macrophytes. We have the emergent plants, floating-leaved plants, free-floating plants, and submerged plants. This illustration represents an aquatic macrophytes are located in the littoral zone of the water body. The littoral zone is divided into segments based upon what types of plants inhabit a given location. In the upper littoral zone, there are emergent plants. Emergent plants are rooted underwater but have exposed stems and leaves and need to be strongly rooted to withstand the wind and waves found in shallow waters, since they do not have the water to support their structure. In the middle littoral zone, which is generally dominated by floating-leaved plants and free-floating plants, these macrophytes are rooted to the lake bottom with leaves floating on the surface of the water. The floating leaves attach to the roots by a flexible stem, allowing the macrophytes to withstand waves, yet gather sunlight, carbon dioxide for photosynthesis. On the other hand, the free-floating zone includes macrophytes located on or just below the surface of the water body. This allows them to withstand waves but could be blown out by strong gusts of wind. Lastly, we have the deepest part of the littoral zone. It's called lower littoral zone. However, this is usually not the case in other ecosystems because the bottom of the lake is too deep for the light penetration. The lower littoral zone is where submerged plants are found. Submerged macrophytes grow completed underwater and their weight is fully supported by it. Thus, they do not invest much energy into structural support. This illustration represents the role of aquatic macrophytes in wetland ecosystems. Plants are using the energy from the sun, carbon dioxide, water, and nutrients to produce biomass available to grazers. Grazers means to feed on growing grasses and herbage. After senescence, the produced organic matter provides organic carbon and nutrients to decomposers. Stems and leaves serve as conduit for gases, bringing oxygen-rich air to rhizosphere and releasing methane.
Examples of aquatic macrophytes.
The first thing to know about the emergent macrophytes are the plants which are rooted in the lake bottom, but their leaves and stems extend out of the water. Now we have an example of emergent macrophytes from the scientific name of Monocoria hastifolia, commonly known as the heart-shaped false pickerel weed belonging to the family name of Pontideraceae. It is a perennial aqueous herbaceous plant with erect or obliquely erect stems occurring on permanent wet areas, fresh ponds, mud flats, in river ditches, and rice fields. Flowering and fruiting occur from the month of July to October. Another one example from the scientific name of Hymenocne amplexicoli, commonly known as West Indian marsh grass, which is a member of the Poaceae, of course the grass family. It is a perennial stoloniferous freshwater crust-forming monospecific stands in seasonally flooded environments of the tropical and subtropical warm climatic zones. It commonly refers open habitats such as lowland, floodplains, marshes, ponds, isolated depression, and the sunny marshes of rivers, lakes, and streams. It is an invasive weed in many parts of the world. Now we have the floating leaved macrophytes. It is the water plant whose roots are attached to the ground and leaves float in the water is called floating leaves. For instance, the scientific name of Ludwigia adscidens, commonly known as water primrose, is a member of the Onagraceae family. It is a creeping aquatic or semi-aquatic perennial herb with catchy white flowers. Its stems and leaves can float on the water surface, enabling it to grow in deep or shallow water. It mostly occurs in freshwater ponds, ditches, swamps, fallow, and wet paddies, and common in the low-lying areas. Another example of floating-leaved macrophytes from the scientific name of Nymphoides indica, commonly known as water snowflakes, belonging to the Myantaceae family. It is an evergreen perennial plant growing in mud and shallow water. It is rooted in mud with stems and leaves floating over the water surface with beautiful snowflakes like flowers and bright green heart-shaped leaves. Take note, although bearing some resemblance to the water lilies, they are not related. Next, we have the free-floating macrophytes. Are the plant that floats on the surface of a pond with its roots hanging in the water. As an example of free-floating macrophytes from the scientific name of Icornea crucipes, commonly known as the water hyacinth, belonging to the family name of Pontederiaceae. It grows in all types of fresh water from lakes or river, swamps, reservoirs, and other types of aquatic habitats. It is regarded as one of the worst aquatic weeds in freshwater as it can quickly form dense floating mat over water surfaces, causing ecological disturbance. Another example of free-floating macrophytes from the scientific name of Pistia stratiotes, commonly known as the water lettuce or cabbage, belonging to the Araceae family. It is a small evergreen perennial plant with feathery roots which form rows of leaves and found mostly in slow-moving water like lakes, ponds, and ditches. Lastly, we have the submerged macrophytes, rooted plants with most of their vegetative mass below the water surface, although small portions may stick above the water. Example of submerged macrophytes from the scientific name of Hydrilla verticillata, commonly known as the water thyme or Indian star vine, belonging to the Hydrocaritaceae family. It can survive up to a depth about 40 feet in non-turbid water. It can be found in a variety of aquatic habitats, such as reservoirs, lakes, ponds, rivers, springs, and tidal zones, and can tolerate a wide range of water conditions from low to high nutrient concentrations. Another example of submerged macrophytes from the scientific name of Potamagnon crispus, commonly known as curly-leaf pondweed, belonging to the Potamagnonaceae family. It grows entirely as a submerged aquatic plant with no floating leaves. Leaves are conspicuously toothed along leaf margins, sessile that attached directly to the stem, narrowly oblong, undulate means wavy like lasagna noodles with a conspicuous mid-vein. Leaf tips are obtuse means rounded or blunt. We have the olive green to reddish brown and somewhat translucent. Stems are flattened, channeled with few branches. This aquatic plant removal involves the science and methodologies used to control invasive and non-invasive aquatic plant species in waterways. There are 4 categories of aquatic plant removal include 1. Physical removal, 2. Biological control, 3. Chemical control, and 4. Habitat alteration. The first thing to know about the physical removal. Physical aquatic weed removal only removes the part of the plant above the pond bottom and leaves the roots intact. The results of physical removal are immediate, but very short-lived. This should be kept in mind when budgeting for long-term solutions to aquatic weed growth. It consists of manually removing the species from the ecosystem by hand or with a machine. This is usually effective because it causes the least amount harmful impact. Some machines are designed to use physical means of removal, but this method is limited by cost and by time. Second, we have the biological control, which involves introducing a select species such as fish, insects, or pathogens that are used as a tool to manage or eradicate the targeted macrophytes. Oftentimes, the introduced species will also eat macrophytes not targeted for removal. While this method can be effective when used properly, it could be possibly introduce a harmful species into ecosystem, causing more damage. Third, we have the chemical control that refers to the use of specially formulated pesticides to kill or control plants. It involves the use of herbicides. Most common herbicides used today to control emergent, floating leaves, free-floating, or submerged aquatic macrophytes. Herbicide treatment resulting in the removal of aquatic plants also removes associated epiphyton on which some fish feed, and this will lead to a decline in a certain fish species. Where aquatic macrophytes are essential for some species for some part of their life history, such as spawning as a nursery site, the species will also disappear after a treatment with herbicides. This method is very effective at completely removing a species, but it is expensive and may cause irreversible damage to an ecosystem if not properly executed. Lastly, we have the habitat alteration, which is a change in land use or land cover that has an impact on local ecosystems. Aquatic plants and animals live in specific places that have the conditions of climate and food resources needed for survival. Over time, a habitat is subject to alteration, especially under influences of human activities. As you can see this picture below on the left side, extracting materials for land and water, which is one of the most obvious causes of habitat alterations. Clearing green cover for building roads and human recreational activities like sailing, fishing, hiking, and adventure sports may cause habitat alteration. It involves manipulation water level, like penetration and or nutrients. As you can see this image on the right side, this can be dangerous because habitat alteration can cause negative disturbance in the flow of energy within an ecosystem. Let us see what are the importance of these aquatic macrophytes in freshwater ecosystem. Aquatic macrophytes are vital constituent of the wetland habitats. A diverse macrophyte assemblage can increase in a wetland. They are regarded as important food reserve for the aquatic organisms due to their high rate of biomass production. The diversity and biomass of this aquatic macrophyte influences the primary productivity, nutrient cycling, and complexities of trophic levels in the freshwater ecosystem, and therefore plays a different role in the structure, functioning, and framing of the aquatic environment. They provide physical structure and substrate for aquatic invertebrates, harvest aquatic insects, which serve as food for fishes. They have the aptitude to absorb excessive nutrients from the water with their effective root system and help improve the water quality. They provide cover, nurseries, habitats, and spawning grounds for fishes, amphibians, zooplanktons, and other aquatic organisms. They produce oxygen and act as link between the littoral and pelagic zones. Thus, they are essential for the proper functioning and balancing of a healthy and attractive freshwater ecosystem. Although aquatic macrophytes are of great importance and are beneficial for the proper functioning of the freshwater ecosystem, some species can be a great nuisance or invasive potentials and therefore regarded as aquatic weeds. I hope this topic helped to better understanding of aquatic macrophytes in terms associated with the location of macrophytes in the littoral zone, overview of aquatic plant removal techniques, and their overall importance in our everyday lives. Again, this is Krystale Joy Lanzaderas. Thank you for listening.